You're tuned in to another episode of the Black Wealth Effect podcast. I'm your host, Mario. Our guest this week is Roy. Roy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you, and definitely a long time coming with getting you on the show. We're happy to pick your brain and learn about your experiences.
Mhm. I love it. I'm an open book. As if you aren't aware by now, you'll quickly find out. So I'm excited to kind of dive into it. It's been funny. I've been watching you guys' journey up to this point for a very long time, and been a fan of the group. Been a fan of also just the message and what you guys are kind of standing for. So it's an absolute pleasure to just be a part of this.
Awesome. And actually, before we delve in to our listeners, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, help us pay the bills so we can keep bringing you this great content.
Sum it up.
And so, Roy, we'll jump right in. So, once again, happy to have you on the show, and definitely excited to learn about your experiences as a mortgage broker, and just get any insight that you could share with our listeners.
Hmm.
To start, we always like to get to know our guests a little bit on the
Yeah,
personal side.
yeah.
And so, for you, like I know, like over the span of your career,
Hmm.
you've worn multiple hats with various jobs,
Yeah.
uh, spanning from security to sales and now real estate.
Hmm.
And so, like, I'm curious, like, how have those experiences shaped your journey and ultimately, like, influenced you, like, in your role today as a mortgage broker?
It's really funny you say that. I mean, honestly, I always applaud whenever I kind of get onto a new podcast or a new platform, the background work that's been done leading into it. So even you saying security, like I got to give you a round of applause on that one. That was a good one. I worked security all through college, where I pretty much paid my way through school. And it's funny that like you said, I've worn a lot of hats getting to this place right now, and I've taken quite an unconventional route to being a mortgage broker. Even just the fact that I'm essentially like a real estate investor first, then turn mortgage broker, whereas usually you find it's the other way around. But yeah, like just to kind of give you like a short spiel and making a long story short, like I said, I worked all through college. Knew right off the bat, like I've always been a really frugal minded individual where it's like, okay, whatever I put my dollar to, whether it's a dollar, whether it's $1,000, whether it's $100,000, like it's gonna go towards whatever is the most valuable. And I always knew like I don't really want to be a tenant. I don't really want to rent. So stayed home until I was like 27, I want to say 28. And the reason why is because I knew that if I moved out, it'd be hard for me to save up to own a home once I'm paying rent. So I was like, okay, got to own some homes before I move out so that at least that foundation is set. And I bought my first house when I was 27 through pre-con. And I was currently working at the bank at the time, ironically enough, and saved up that money through working security and working at the bank. Finally got the pre-con, 25 grand, put it down as my deposit. And they're like, okay, cool, closing's in a year. I'm like, okay, lovely. The year passed, and then, as you know, closing comes up, and they're like, okay, well, let us know your mortgage situation. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, doesn't the mortgage come with my house? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, well, we've got something to figure out here. So, running around for those 2 to 3 months trying to figure out my mortgage situation so that I could not lose my deposit and close on the home. Like, not losing the deposit was way more important to me than actually getting the keys, because I'm like, I'm not losing my 25 grand. And just going through the process of trying to get my mortgage for at the time, which was about $365,000, was just insane. And when I say insane, like I think I had gone to like maybe 4 or 5 or 6 different brokers, walked into my own branches. They were all telling me no because I was only working part time at the time. And I'm like, why is it so difficult for me to get this mortgage? Long story short, closed on it finally. And then I rented the property out, and wasn't until I was wondering, why am I not cash flowing and making the money I see everybody else that's a real estate investor saying that they make? Why aren't I making that money? And it wasn't until, ironically enough, I ran into the social media page of Austin Ye. And he was like, yeah, multifamily, multifamily, multifamily. And I'm like, okay, like why? Multiple streams of income in the one unit and in the one
Yep.
property. So when I realized that, I had been real estate investing wrong essentially, and also for what I wanted. sorry, let me correct myself. Real estate investing wrong for what I actually wanted, which was cash flow,
Yeah.
and also realizing, well, why did I have such a headache closing on this property to begin with? Those two things eventually kind of led me in the direction of kind of getting my mortgage license. And I wanted to kind of help people figure out how to not be in the same position that I was in when I closed on my property, but then B, I want to make sure that I was good for whatever I want to do going forward. So I want to handle my own mortgages so I didn't have to rely on the people that gave me such a tough time for my mortgage. And that's pretty much how I got here today. Mixing in, a little bit of my YouTube background and my, charismatic personality, I just educate and inform people on everything that I wish I knew leading into my situation. And that's really how I approach everything when it comes to my business, is just how can I provide the value that I would have found valuable for myself at that time now. And it's been working out since. I got a second property out of it, doing really well in my business, and it's been something to marvel at, because when I look back on it, that first property that I closed on that I described was such a headache was only 4 years ago. So time time is a crazy thing, and you can make a lot happen in what seems like a short period of time, but it's one of the beautiful things about it.
Agreed. Yeah, that's awesome. Just
Yeah,
over that short period of time, right? Like to
yeah.
your point. And there's actually a few things I want to unpack there. So,
Hmm.
one, like going back to that experience with the pre-construction, like
Hmm.
what was your key learning coming out of that? And
Hmm.
then if you were to go back, call it either like 5 years or 10 years,
Hmm.
and speak to your younger self, what advice would you give them in terms of real estate investing outside of obviously buying sooner or buying more,
the
right?
the obvious ones, yeah.
Yeah,
The biggest thing for myself was making sure that, like, and this is why I love when people reach out to me early, is just being proactive, understanding what it is that you need to know or what's going to be important at a certain time. It's never too early. And I think that that's one thing that I pinpoint as the point that I should have done things differently. Waiting until I got that message in the mail from the builder saying you're closing in 90 days was too late at that point. That's way too late to start to figure out what it is that I need to do if I'm not already where I needed to be to close smoothly, because there's so many moving parts. And I think that what I notice now more than anything when I'm even dealing with the older generation or even the younger generation, the one constant that I find is that people look at their mortgage like it's something that they're entitled to, and it's really a privilege, right? And I don't say that in the sense that, like, oh, home ownership is something that not everyone's going to get, and that's the reality of it. But there's a mechanics behind it that is going to change the dynamic of how you qualify for whatever it is that you want or need. So for instance, the reason why I was having the heartache or the headache that I was having when I was trying to qualify for my mortgage, I mean, heartache still applies too, because it was pretty close, is I was part time technically, right? And without having those 2 years history of that type of income, the lender can only look at what's guaranteed. And these are the things that really go into, not only the difficulty in qualifying for a mortgage, but the fact that everyone's situation is so different. So it's hard to give any concrete or, um, you know, one size fits all type of solutions out there, because everyone's situation is different, right? For someone who works, as a casual nurse, working 80 hours a week, the fact that they're casual changes the whole dynamic of how they qualify for their mortgage. And for someone who's a salaried individual, maybe they just got their job 3 months ago. Well, the fact that it's a salary and it's a guaranteed income changes the fact that they don't need 2 years history, right? So all of these moving parts really changes the trajectory and the dynamic of how someone goes about buying a home, regardless of down payment and everything else in between. So that's one thing that I would definitely pinpoint as something I wish I did a little bit differently, is the minute I signed on the dotted line for that property, or before I even did that, sorry, I should correct
yeah,
myself. Before you even sign on the dotted line for a pre-construction, you want to get pre-approved. You want to figure out what your situation entails so that you can then proceed accordingly. So yeah, that's the due diligence that I think that a lot of people are missing, and I wish more people would take, and I wish that I took myself, because once you sign on that dotted line and the ink dries, you're bound to a contract, and if you're not able to fulfill that contract, it's you on the hook who's going to be losing your deposit and possibly getting sued.
yeah, no, that's great advice. And so what about the second half of the question, just around so like you touched on like what you would do differently, and then like
Mm-hmm.
what advice? would you give
What
yourself?
advice? So yeah, reach out to somebody sooner, and don't just get one opinion. I mean, as someone might like myself, who I'm very confident in what it is that I bring to the table in terms of value for my clients. I encourage people to go and explore, get more than just my consultation, get more than just my feedback, even though I don't think you'll need it. But I mean, it doesn't help. I mean, it doesn't hurt to, get that second opinion and maybe confirm what the last person said, right? Because I think that that's one thing that I maybe did to my disservice is I bought my house and I told my mom, and my mom was like, good for you. Like, I got my house a couple of years ago and it was a piece of cake because I just had to show them my pay stub. And this is one thing that I even have trouble to this day telling people that, come to the consultations with their parents or maybe have someone in their ear from another generation is qualifying for your mortgage today is so much different than it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, even a year ago, right? And what somebody went through maybe when they got their house 10 years ago could be night and day in terms of what your situation and how your experience is going to be today. So you want to make sure you're getting professional advice, professional feedback, so that you're following the right advice and the right words, as opposed to people who are kind of giving you their experience that is going to be far different than what you might go through.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that. Like that advice just around like being proactive, as you touched on. Um, Obviously, connecting with the right professionals to figure out your game plan as it relates to your finances, and then still getting the advice of trusted. I'll emphasize trusted
Yeah.
family and friends and folks in your network, right? To
Hmm.
get that broad perspective.
Exactly,
It's
exactly, because
great.
that knowledge and that guidance is going to be key, right? Like you're not going to know what to do and how to do it without having somebody kind of guide you through the process, right? And I think that's where a lot of people kind of go wrong is thinking they already know it all, and then they find out at the last minute or the hard way you didn't actually know, and now you kind of have to pay for it one way or another. So being
Yeah.
proactive, being humble, and actually seeking out the information can make all the difference in how your transaction and your experience goes.
Hmm. Yeah. And so uh, the last several months, the market has obviously shifted a ton. And so we obviously had the Bank of Canada make the decision to not increase rates. I think it was the fourth consecutive time most
Yeah.
recently.
Hmm.
And so once again, a lot has changed. Like I'm curious, what trends are you seeing amongst buyers
Mm.
and as well as lenders in today's
Mm.
environment?
That's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that. Even myself too, because I think one of the reasons why I excel is because I'm very able to put my foot in someone else's shoes. Like I've been in the consumer's shoes before. I've been a buyer not too long ago. I see what the lenders are not only doing, but their sentiment behind why they're doing what they're doing as well. So what I'm seeing now more than anything is a lot of I want to be careful with my words. So I'm seeing a lot of anxiousness. So and I
Yep.
think that that was kind of to be expected, but not to this degree, not for me, anyways. All through the last year and even the ending of 2022, it was a lot of okay, when is this over? This is getting painful, and rightfully so. It was very excruciating, right? And we were all kind of just hoping for things to let up a little bit, just so we could start to breathe, have a little bit of the weight alleviated off of us. And it's like now that the holds have taken place, where there hasn't been a rate change, it's almost as if people are perceiving them as the rate drop, which is I think is a little dangerous in my opinion, right? Because
Mhm.
there's nothing that's saying that we're out of the woods. And granted, I do think that rate drops are on the way. However, I think where people are kind of maybe misjudging is they're maybe expecting too much of a rate drop too soon, and they're starting to be proactive with that hope in mind. So I'm seeing a lot of people look to get pre-approved, so they can go out and snag something. Which I do think that there's still a lot of good deals out there. There's a lot of opportunities still on the market because the market hasn't totally shifted in the sense that in some areas there's still not as much demand as maybe the sellers would like. However, the problem comes into play where if you still need appraisals to come in at a certain value, that there hasn't been the time for the market to readjust in that sense. And for the people who are maybe unaware of that, if you buy something for 600K right now because you were really adamant on getting that property, and in that area that kind of house is still appraising for about 550, Well, that 50K shortfall on the appraisal is going to be something that maybe you didn't account for that is going to come out of your pocket because the market hasn't adjusted to the fact that people are just looking to buy. People, the appraised value of a property is not based off of the buyer sentiment. It's based off of past sales that have closed. So even if someone just purchased a home and hasn't closed on it yet, that doesn't directly impact the value of the house that you're looking to buy yet. So that's something that I think is something to be mindful of. And you want to make sure you're still being, aware of your budget and what you can afford because I see, just like a lot of people did, leading into a lot of that high interest rate market, maybe a little bit of overestimation of what they can afford. And also not anticipating things becoming more expensive outside of that mortgage and maybe even within it. So with that being said, I'm seeing some people kind of peek their head into variables, which is already more expensive than a short term fixed rate. And with that being said, is if you go into that variable and let's just say, for example, rates don't come down as quickly as you're anticipating, or worse yet, there's one more rate hike in the tuck. What does that do for your personal cash flow? So that's where I really want people to kind of maybe take a deep breath and step back a little bit and be a little bit more not hesitant, but just analytical with what it is that they're looking to do because it doesn't take much to take a misstep, and we've seen it already. And
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of FOMO when it comes to this market because no matter how you slice it, there is a housing shortage. So people don't want to be on the outside looking in. And that can cause people to make a lot of irrational decisions off of emotion. And that is one thing that leads to a lot of regret.
Yeah, that's a great point. And like I think the media definitely contributes to a lot of that kind of
100%.
mindset
Mm-hmm.
and FOMO to your point, right?
Yep.
Like all we hear now in the news is rate cuts coming soon, rates cuts coming
Yep.
soon, like and we just don't know, right? And
We
so
know.
I
Yeah.
think to your point around just being cautiously optimistic
Mm-hmm.
and doing your due diligence, not just going off of emotion or as hard as that can be at times.
Yep.
I think that's definitely important,
Yep.
especially navigating today's market, right?
1,000%. And I think it's funny too because I was someone that was like all through last year, not all through, like maybe like half of the year leading into, especially going into the second half of last year into this year. I was saying, okay, I know that rates are not where you would ideally like them to be, but this is really the market that I would prefer to buy in, right? The market where maybe, yes, my mortgage is a little bit higher than I would like, but I'm going to be getting things at a lower price because there's less people to compete with. And in Canada, that is the major problem. Well, primarily Ontario, right?
Yeah.
Is you go into a property that you want to buy, there's several people looking to get the same property. You guys end up bidding against one another. When you took away the competition, you can get the property at asking or below asking. That was ideally what you wanted to buy in because that gave you the opportunity to put in the conditions that you needed and also not to drive up the price on something where essentially the debt that you're going to have attached to it is based off of that price. So it's funny now we're in a market where the rates are kind of dropping a little bit. We're seeing prices potentially start to go up, and now people are like licking their chops. And I'm like, in my opinion, would you not have preferred the previous market? But I don't know, man. That FOMO plays a large part, right? Because nobody wants to be the one that was like, oh, I never got to get something when everybody was getting something. You kind
Yeah,
of want to be the person who got something when nobody else did.
exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what about lenders? Like, what are
Yeah.
lenders doing nowadays? Any specific trends that you're seeing?
So with lenders specifically, I think what we're seeing most is that they're a little conservative, right? Because the big notion last year was, like I said, those properties not appraising for what they were either purchased for, primarily in the pre-con market. And I think that what I think is cool right now is there's a couple of alternative lenders, and as you know, the prime lenders like the big five banks and all the A lenders that everybody like like is drooling over. They're also the most risk adverse. So when it comes to the alternative lenders, they kind of see things from a different lens. And I think what's most cool is depending on like your pre-con and when you may have bought it, they'll allow you to do the mortgage. And I know I see a lot of people make content about this where you can get the mortgage based off of the current value and you might get some of your down payment back. And it's like, sounds great. But like that also means having a larger payment attached to it. But those are the lenders that are realizing that the value that you maybe paid for your property a year before, even though it might not appraise for that right this moment, that value should restore itself depending on the location. So I'm seeing lenders be a little bit more have a little bit larger risk appetite. just because they're also expecting rates to go down. They're kind of seeing what everybody else is seeing at this current time from a buyer's perspective, right? Where it's like, okay, sure, rates are what they are right now, but when the rates come down a bit, everyone's going to swarm the market, prices are going to kind of jump up, meaning values jump up. So there are some alternative lenders who are kind of like, allowing to go a little bit beyond the 80% loan to value in certain scenarios based on location, and also letting you go off of the appraised value or the price that you purchased for, depending on when you purchased it at. So for the people who maybe bought when the market was on fire and were, are a little nervous now because maybe I want to praise for that right now, there's a good handful of alternative lenders that'll, still honor that price before, give you the mortgage that you need based off of that price. Understand that they're a little bit underwater on that mortgage right now, but when that value restores itself, then that equity will restore itself as well. So it kind of hedges their investment, so to speak, which is the one thing that I always have to remind people is like, listen, like your mortgage is a mortgage to you. To the lender, it's an investment. And they want to make sure that they're hedging their bets on their investment and that they're safe and they have an exit strategy. So they want to make sure that there's a significant amount of equity in that property in any scenario. So I'm seeing that come back into the fold. I think one area that's still not coming back or not back yet, so to speak, is just the unsecured the unsecured mortgages where like, like, okay, you want to buy a property and do renovations? Cool, I'll give you all the money. Not
Yeah.
happening anymore, right? Like it's too risky because who's going to say you're going to do the renovations? Who's to say that adds the value that you're expecting it to add in a market like today? And like who can guarantee anything? So if they can't secure that money against the tangible asset, they're just not going to give you the money for it. So I've had a couple of people who, investors like ourselves, looking to get some renovation money, and not that it's impossible, but it's definitely not a walk in the park like it may have been a couple of years ago when, you know money was just pretty much being printed and handed out like hotcakes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Conservative optimism. It feels like it's a
exactly.
theme that's
Yes,
happening right now.
perfect word for it.
That's awesome. And so, do you have an example of like a challenging deal that you either recently completed or you're currently going through it? And
Mhm.
what could you share just about that experience so far?
So I've got a couple, man. I mean, honestly, like as a mortgage broker, any seasoned and well versed mortgage broker will tell you that like the good deals are not just found, they're made. So you got to kind of be creative and pitch to your lender like why this is a deal that they should take and an investment that they should make, right? Because like I said, that mortgage to them is an investment. So I'll give you two actually where I've had a ton of my clients end up coming to me because maybe they went to their bank and their bank maybe gave them a runaround and then rejected them last minute. So I have a client who's a traveling nurse, and she actually closed on Friday. And if you guys are maybe unaware, just to give you guys a little crash course, traveling nurses are a really big thing since the pandemic, where they're pretty much being asked to go to a completely different location that's short on nurses, and because they're relocating for that time period, they're going to get paid a large amount of money, right? So they're making like $200 an hour, $100 an hour, whatever it is, because they're that high in demand in that area. Some of them are going to like Muskoka, some are going to like Edmonton. They're going all around the country. And if you're a nurse, listen to this right now, like definitely explore your options because I think you guys are, top of the line when it comes to a need in our community. So, nonetheless, because they're now on a contract for wherever they're going to be, their income is only guaranteed for a portion of time, right? As I kind of went through on the beginning of this episode, like your income is how guaranteed it is to continue being earned by you is the biggest thing that the lender is going to be concerned about. So, if you're making $200 an hour, for example, but that's only until May 1st, the lender's going to be like, well, what are you doing on May 2nd and onward? But that's from the bank's perspective. Like I said, a lot of banks are very risk adverse. That's a risk to them. However, it's all about how you structure things and pitch things to a lender. So I had a couple of nurses, because I once you kind of help one out, they tell the whole crew, and it's not a problem for me. I love it, but it's interesting to see, and just having the ability to kind of showcase like, okay, someone's making this amount of money. They've been in this industry for much longer than just this contract, and you can see all the income coming into their bank accounts. You might not have the 2 years T4s that you would like to see, but the income is there and the contract is there. And as you've seen time and time again, because I think I showed the contract that she's currently on, the contract she was on prior, and the contract before that, and there was very little time in between contracts. So just showing the continuity is the whole name of the game, right? To really propose somebody in their best light and showcase that, this is a viable borrower and they're going to be able to pay their mortgage. That's all you care about. So just being able to do that and make a deal out of someone who, was pretty much rejected from their own home bank, and then I got to take them back to that same bank and get them their mortgage there was really cool to me. I won't say the bank's name, but they know who they are. And now that my clients got a mortgage with them, and they're gonna happily be able to, have the house that they want and not have to sacrifice and wait to come back home to buy that home, right? Like they want to be able to make these moves while they're on the go and grinding for a reason, right? They're making this money to save up and buy the home and whatever the case is for them, and everyone has their own why, but it's really discouraging when you're told, oh, this is what you're doing right now, we can't give you a mortgage for it for whatever reason. So I'm glad that I could kind of swoop in and save the day and still make someone's dreams come true, despite the fact that maybe someone had kind of turned them away prior. Another deal that was really cool, just kind of different from like an occupation standpoint, just as you guys are probably well aware, like there's just been a ton of people kind of going through some real tough times over the past couple of months and years, with all the interest rates hikes and just money becoming tight and the economy being in the state that it's in right now. And I had a client who pretty much moved in the midst of this, did a little bit of misanalyzing in terms of what they could actually afford, bit off a little bit more than they could chew, especially with costs of everything rising, and they bought a home that was essentially a project for them to live in. And as you know, paying your mortgage for a house that you're living in that's not income generating and paying for the renovations in that home can be very, very draining. So
Yeah.
they kind of got to a point where they kind of hit a wall, ran out of money for the renovations. The renovations weren't complete just yet. And also, like, they have their mortgage to make sure that they're keeping up with. And that can be really taxing from a working perspective. So, what I was able to do was kind of maybe get them a private for a short period of time that was prepaid. And this is something that I'm trying to just share with more and more people, because like I know you're well versed in what these things mean, but it's a lot of people that are out there that don't know that these things even exist. So what a prepaid private mortgage is, let's say I'm giving Mario 30 grand, and the payments for this private mortgage would be $2,000 a month for as long as he has this 30 grand for. Well, what I could do is say, okay, lender, he's doing this right now. He can't make these $2,000 payments every month. But what we can do is when he pays you back your $30,000, he'll pay you each month's mortgage payment in it as well. So instead of you just getting your 30 grand, and let's say you had the 30 grand for 6 months, right? So that would have been 30 grand times $2,000 for 6 months, which is $12,000. So that would have been a total of $42,000. I'm not even going to get into fees and all that stuff. But on the surface, $42,000. Instead of you taking 30 grand, paying $2,000 every single month for 6 months, and then paying back the 30 grand at the end of it, you can just have the 30 grand today and pay back $42,000 at the end of the 6 months. No monthly payments in the meantime. And this was something that was huge for the client because they were able to get that amount of money, finish the renovations, and the goal was always to refinance it into one easy mortgage to pay back. So when they refinance now, they were able to pay back that private lender in full and now have the one mortgage, and this also let them catch up on the mortgage payments that they were slowly falling behind on, and they also got the renovations done. So it's really cool to just be a part of people's the high highs and help them find the solutions that maybe weren't easy to locate beforehand, but also like just kind of helping people get out of sticky situations that it happens to all of us, sometimes not as big as a home, but we always have those we all have those missteps where we're like, okay, I wish I kind of did a little bit of due diligence better than this, or maybe I kind of dotted my i's and crossed my t's a little bit better, but it doesn't mean that it's the end of the world. So being able to kind of swoop in and help somebody with something like that, it means the world to me, because like afterward, her and her family sent me like family photos in the house, and like they were like finally popping the champagne that they had been waiting to pop, and it's just like I don't know how they would have gone to that point otherwise, right? So yeah, those are two instances that just come to mind off the top of my head when you ask me something like that, because it's crazy out here. It's not a walk in the park, and I think that's where people often make the mistake, is just thinking like, okay, this shouldn't be a tough task, but when you're asking for hundreds of thousands of dollars for people from institutions to do certain things, it does become a little strenuous at times, and it maybe isn't as simple as you maybe thought beforehand.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And so, like for someone, and I think you touched on it a little bit as well, like when you talked about creative financing,
Mm-hmm.
like for someone who's like looking to do like maybe they have a couple of properties under their belt, they're looking to try to do a flip.
Mm-hmm.
or Burr in today's market. I love how you laughed at that because I was gonna say, do those even still exist? But
I wish if they do, let me know. I would love one right now.
like, what advice or like guidance are you giving to those experienced investors in
Hmm.
today's market?
Letting them know, like, well, first and foremost, like, especially now, like you even saying that word "burr," like, I haven't heard that word in more than a year, because the Burr was a strategy that was really viable and really good in a market that was quickly rising in value, right? Whereas, like myself, I did my Burr in Sudbury, and the reason why it was such a tough task for me is because I was doing it in probably the worst time frame to possibly do it. Where, as I was trying to add value through those renovations, the market was depreciating in value. So every time I added value, the value just dipped anyways. So in a market like today's where there's so much uncertainty and you don't really want to operate from a place of optimism, especially blindly, you don't really want to take on those kind of endeavors. But nonetheless, first thing that I always ask people when they come to me with certain strategies that they're looking to implement is, where did you hear it from? Like, and more times than not, they have a video that they're gonna send me on TikTok that I'm like, okay, let's debunk this really quickly because it sounds great. It always sounds great on TikTok, but I just kind of walk them through all the risks because, as like, the not Grant Cardone or whatever the name is, they always tell you this is how you become a millionaire and da da da, and people love it,
It's
but they
so
don't tell
easy.
you all the risks attached to it. And why it works for them is because they got a bunch of equity already, they got a bunch of cash. It's
Yeah.
not that big of a risk to them in their situation. But when you're talking about somebody who's looking to leverage their only home that maybe doesn't have as much equity as they would like, and looking to kind of expand their portfolio, depending on where they want to buy, what they're trying to do, you want to make sure that they know all their options and all the risks attached to it. So
Yeah.
that's definitely what it is right now. Is just more so like a full overview, a full like analyzing of what their situation is right now. Do you own a home? If so, how many? What are you looking to do? What's the exit strategy? That's the biggest one that I'm always kind of going through. Is, okay, are you looking to sell this home, or are you looking to refinance it? Because one of the biggest things that I think people misunderstand when it comes to refining out as an exit strategy is you're only getting up to 80% loan to value. And when I say up to, you're not guaranteed to get that 80% depending on where that property is. For example, on my property in Sudbury, I tried to, pull a little equity out myself. They told me we're not going past 75 over here, buddy. So, you know what I mean? Like, it's,
Yeah.
you got to be mindful of that. And then lastly, you got to qualify for it, right? Like, at the end of the day, when you're looking to take out more debt essentially to expand your portfolio, you still have to be able to carry a significant amount of that debt yourself with your own income, because they're not looking at all of your income depending on what institution that you're looking to get your mortgage with. So when you're looking to get, your second or your third property and have a mortgage on all two or three, how much income do you earn? Because that's what the lender is going to be looking at, because they understand that if you have a rental property, sure, you might be getting some rental income, but you're gonna have to turn over tenants. They might not pay you every month. The property might flood and catch on fire. There's other expenses that might pop up. They're going to analyze and mitigate their risk as much as possible, so they want to make sure that you make enough money to cover those things should they pop up. And that's the part that really catches people off guard. So that's really what a lot of the consultations and the strategy calls look like these days, where I get a lot of people who have a lot of lofty goals, which I absolutely love. I'm somebody with lofty goals myself, but I want them to understand that there's a lot that goes into this, and it's not glorified like you saw on Instagram or TikTok on Grant Cardone's reel that you saw for 60 seconds, not even going through all the real ins and outs of what that strategy entails.
Facts.
Yeah.
Love it. So right, like I could continue this conversation forever, but thank
Keep
you,
going.
thank you. Really appreciate the myth debunking, the sharing your experiences, and just providing listeners with insight on
Mm-hmm.
the key factors that lenders consider and what they
Mm-hmm.
should be thinking about
Right.
as they continue to embark in their investing journey. Um, Before I let you go, though,
Mm-hmm.
like if you could just share for our listeners, like what's next for you as we head into the call it halfway mark in 2024,
I
and
love
then
it.
what's the best way for listeners to reach out to you?
First and foremost, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. You're saying you could continue going on and on. I as well. I just looked at the time. I'm like 34 minutes. How? I'm just getting started. But I appreciate you for having me. Um, I think you said one of the key things to leave off with as we kind of head out for people who are looking to maybe get into real estate investing or just the real estate market in general. I would say the biggest thing you want to do is just maximize your income and minimize your debts. Those are the two biggest things whenever you're looking to get a mortgage or buy a home. Your down payment, yes, is crucial. That's one of the things that's going to come into it. But a lender is always going to look your way if you have the income that they need to carry some debt, right? If you can show that you can afford it, they're going to give it to you. And if you don't have other debts that are eating up that income, they're going to look at you even better. So those are the two things that I really want to drive home is try to steer clear of debt as much as possible. I think I put on my social media not too long ago. Like I bought my car recently. I needed a new car, bought it cash because car loans, you know, credit card debt and all those things, they kill your buying power with the swiftness. So steer clear of debt and just earn as much as you possibly can because that's going to be what really drives you to building that portfolio that you're looking to build over the next coming days, years, months, whatever it is, and get you to retire early, which is my goal. And how to get in contact with me, honestly, and not hard to find. Financial Solutions, FLYYNANCIAL solutions on Instagram and TikTok. And my booking link is right there in the bio. And every booking, every consultation, any conversation we ever have is completely free. Because really, what I kind of get by is just kind of spreading information and having these conversations that end up leading everybody to their promised land, whatever that might be. So that's me in a nutshell.
Amazing. Well, Roy, thanks again so much for being on the show and sharing your wisdom. For our listeners, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Black Wealth Effect podcast.
Thanks. Cheers.
Awesome. Just going to stop recording now.